Penguin Random House Audio presents The Unclaimed, Abandonment and Hope in the City of Angels by Pamela Prickett and Stefan Timmermans. Read for you by Nan Mcnamara. For Soraya, Meryl, and Jasper, in the hope that they will claim us. May perpetual light shine upon the faces of all who rest here. May the lives they lived unfold further in spirit. May all their past travails find ease in the kindness of clay. John O'Donohue, on Passing a Graveyard. Author's note. This is a work of narrative nonfiction. Dialogue and events were witnessed firsthand or reconstructed based on interviews, archives, and published accounts. The unclaimed are all too soon forgotten. Out of respect for their lives, we use the names they went by. To mask their identities would mean complicity in a double erasure. The names of their relatives, friends, neighbors, as well as the workers charged with tending their bodies and the volunteers who show up to mourn, are also unchanged, unless indicated in the notes to protect their privacy. Sometimes I feel like I don't have a partner. Sometimes I feel like my only friend is the city I live in, the City of Angels. Lonely as I am, together we cry. Red Hot Chili Peppers, Under the Bridge. Prologue. Ashes. Clouds of thick smoke rose from the city's ridges into a dusky blue sky. It was early December 2017, and the hills north of Los Angeles were burning. 9 months of apocalyptic dryness fueled by strong Santa Ana winds had primed the region for destruction. More than 230,000 residents fled as fires threatened thousands of acres of parched paradise and the homes, schools, and businesses nestled in them. Miles downwind, a blanket of thin white ash had settled on the windshields inching along Interstate 5. The 5, as locals call it. Even with the windows shut tight, drivers breathed in the unexpectedly sweet smell of smoldering sage, chaparral, and pine. In Boyle Heights, a largely Mexican-American working-class neighborhood east of downtown, life carried on. Mothers pushed strollers down broken sidewalks lined with brightly colored iron-barred bungalows, taquerias, and auto body shops. Cars drove past sun-bleached murals, their colors muted by shadows cast from the tangles of power lines overhead. Street vendors sold fruit amid the occasional rooster crow. And in the heart of the neighborhood, at the corner of Lorena and First Streets, behind the brick wall and iron gate of a county complex few Angelenos knew existed, 2 black men, dressed in full-length white hazmat suits and surgical masks, moved through a chalky plume of dark gray ash. But the particles that billowed around them weren't from the wildfires. They came from cremated bodies. The taller of the 2 men, Craig Garnett, grabbed a brown plastic box the size of a small cigar humidor from the bed of a white pickup truck. Many of the boxes had been warped from pressure and time, and their lids had started to pop. Craig leaned over an 8-foot-deep open grave and emptied the box, tapping the sides of the container to be sure every bit of cremains fell out, and then tossing it onto the ground beside him. Puffs of ash had settled on his eyebrows and nose bridge, making him appear older than he was. The other man, Albert Gaskin, nearly a foot shorter and decades more senior, picked up the empty boxes and carried them to a nearby cargo van, where he threw them into the hold. Then he returned to the pit and helped Craig dump ashes. 6 sets of ashes had no names, and others, the cremains of infants, had been stored in small envelopes tied carefully with string. Albert and Craig moved quickly. They were under strict orders to finish by the end of the business day. Over 5 hours, the men poured 1,461 boxes and envelopes into the grave. A year's worth of ashes. Every box, every envelope, every cloud of gray ash was once a person with a story. Someone who'd lived and died in Los Angeles County. Someone who'd had no family to claim their body. The ashes of these nearly 1,500 people cremated by the county would join the remains of 100,000 other people already buried in the scrawny patch of land that made up the Potter's Field of Los Angeles. Fewer than 4 acres, the public cemetery serves as the forever resting place of these abandoned souls. Their remains, reduced to their organic essence, commingled and disappeared into the soil. Albert took a break from transferring the emptied boxes. He looked past the pit in the ground to the mountains surrounding the Los Angeles basin, their sharp contours blurred by distant smoke. After nearly 50 years working at the cemetery, the reality of a mass grave, hidden among the everyday rhythms of neighborhood life, still troubled him. He did what he could as the appointed caretaker for the county cemetery. He and Craig emptied ashes into a grave once a year. The rest of the time, they spent their long days cremating abandoned bodies and placing the cremains in the brown plastic boxes for storage. The county's policy was to store ashes for 3 years, just in case a loved one showed up to retrieve them. Albert had been known to hold ashes longer. He understood what it took to scrape together the roughly $400 claim fee. But retrievals were rare. Where Albert grew up, in Louisiana Bayou country, if you had to sell a cow to bury your mama, you would. Here in L.A., he felt people were fine to leave their mamas to be cremated and dumped in a common grave by strangers. In fact, Albert felt, people seemed to care less and less. Albert thought lives should be remembered and death should be witnessed. It was the least a community could do. But county bureaucrats wanted to dispose of the abandoned dead as cheaply and quickly as possible, and Albert's boss preferred to keep the burial out of the public eye. Behind the scenes of the county's Office of Decedent Affairs, a fight was brewing. It might come down to who retired first. Albert wasn't going to be able to work forever. His plan had always been to return home to Louisiana. He took a deep breath. Smoke hung in the air, a reminder of the precarious balance between life and death. But there was no time to ponder the fires or the fate of the dead. He stretched his back and shoulders and stood up. The ashes were calling. Death has never been a simply biological event. Early anthropologists observed that even as our bodies undergo a physiological process when we die, the decay of flesh and bones, our death also sparks a social process in which we ease out of this world and settle safely into the memories of the living. Across cultures and time, this resituating of body and person has occurred through funeral rites, burial, memorialization, and personal grief. It is essential to who we are. As the Italian historian Giambattista Vico reminds us, humanitas in Latin comes first and properly from humando, burying. In this way, burying the dead, the German philosopher Hans-Georg Gadamer wrote, is perhaps the fundamental phenomenon of becoming human. Yet, not all of us receive a decent burial. The poor have always been more likely than the wealthy to end up in unmarked graves and in so-called potter's fields, the useless pockmarked tracts of land dug up for clay since biblical times by potmakers. Because the extractions left large holes in the red clay, those barren fields became the place of choice for burying the indigent dead. Today's potter's fields continue to be located in undesirable city plots or on the far reaches of existing cemeteries, outside the view of visitors. They're where we inter the most worthless, as determined by those who consider themselves worth more. Until the late 19th century, Los Angeles had no need for a potter's field. The region was a landscape of sweeping vistas, small ranches, adobe dwellings, and citrus trees, with the dead buried in plots next to churches. But when the Mexican War ended and the gold rush began in
Sample complete. Ready to continue?